Welcome, scholars, to part 2 of the lecture, The Age of Aquarius. This is lecture 28. In part 2, we're going to be looking at Vietnam, where Americans are going to say, we don't give a damn about Nam. In many ways, Vietnam is what derails the Lyndon Baines Johnson presidency. It is a war that's going to seem like an echo of the Korean conflict, but quickly becomes very apparent to many Americans that it is unwinnable. The French had left Vietnam after their defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. And the United States had funded their efforts and now is concerned about, the falling dominoes of communism in Southeast Asia. As we mentioned earlier in another lecture, Kennedy had sent advisors to Vietnam to help watch out after what's going on there. But by 1964, we're getting closer to actual American involvement in terms of the full-on war conflict. And the story of that happens at a place called Tonkin Gulf, where the United States becomes convinced that it has been attacked by these Vietnamese communists. In truth, it's not likely that the United States was truly attacked at Tonkin Gulf. In fact, there's enough evidence to suggest that Americans misinterpreted a lot what was going on there and just assumed that they were under some kind of attack. But the idea of an attack is good enough for Lyndon Baines Johnson. And as has been the case in American history before, we don't get involved until there is an attack of sorts, and Tonkin Gulf is enough. Johnson asked for Congress to repel the attack by all necessary measures, and that essentially amounts to a blank check for war. He can do anything he wants to repel this attack. No actual war is declared, but by giving Lyndon Baines Johnson this blank check for the conflict, we can be in a war even if it's not named a war on paper. And I think that's an interesting part of American 20th century history, the way in which naming things or not naming things becomes a justification for getting around inconvenient definitions like declaring war. Korea is a police action. But is it just really a war? Vietnam is a repelling of an attack. It's a conflict, but it really is just a war. Why all of this? Well, the fear, of course, of domino effect. Vietnam falls, all these other countries will fall, motivates the United States to be worried about the spread of communism. We're almost obsessed about the spread of communist ideology. But there's also at the core of that too a fear of losing authority. We've been involved in Vietnam since the end of World War II by helping the French, and we can't have American authority be questioned. If American authority is questioned, then the Soviets will kind of win. They'll take that as a sign of American weakness. And in fact, plenty of scholars have argued that we had to intervene in Vietnam, otherwise the Soviets would think America is weak. So the guy who comes up with operation names for U.S. conflicts, name this one Operation Rolling Thunder. It's a great name for a war in Vietnam. It was neither thunderous nor rolling, unfortunately. So despite its awesome sounding name in 1965, it does not do the job Too much hype. It was supposed to be an 8-week bombing campaign of North Vietnam. Bomb them, repel the attack, boom. Now, mind you, we've been in Vietnam involved since 1954. Now in 1965, we're going to do an 8-week attack bombing campaign. The U.S. won't leave until 1973. Don't know about you, but 1965 to 1973 is not 8 weeks. Here's the domino theory at work. If one kitten naps, the rest will follow. In Vietnam itself, one of the problems is the U.S. doesn't really have a grasp of what's actually going on. We filtered all of Vietnam sort of life experiences through the lens of communism, and that's caused us to miss a lot of things. The leader of communist North Vietnam, in fact, was fond of quoting Thomas Jefferson and seeing Vietnam in the North as a war of independence, a war of colonial freedom against the French oppressors. And in the South, where the U.S. had backed up a dictatorial regime that is okay because it's not communist, we miss the fact that that regime is brutal and doing horrific things, but of course, you know, it's not communist, so it's okay. And this famous incident of a monk setting himself on fire in protest of the South Vietnamese regime became a clear symbol of just what was at stake for the Vietnamese that we don't get. So the monk is protesting what's going on in South Vietnam, the supposedly free side of Vietnam, sets himself on fire, chants, and there he is as he's burning up, literally burning to death. He's, you know, pointing to the fact that he's willing to die to point out what's going on in his country. Afterwards, supposedly his heart is not burned. It becomes a relic, sort of an icon of the resistance. And the leader of South Vietnam is in fact murdered by his own guards because of his heinousness. This also became the cover of an album by Rage Against the Machine in 1992. So here's Vietnam. North Vietnam is communist. South Vietnam is not communist. They are divided here with a demilitarized zone. Gosh, this sounds like an echo of Korea, is it not? Two halves, North communist, South not. So Gulf of Tonkin is up here, and the United States, of course, must repel this attack by these evil, freedom-seeking communists who are fond of quoting Thomas Jefferson and calling themselves, you know, seekers of independence from imperialistic oppression. What made Vietnam particularly difficult is Vietnam was not a conventional war. It was not a let's roll armies across cities and shoot each other in sort of like an organized fashion. The Vietnamese were accustomed to fighting in the jungles and launching secret and surprise attacks, popping up out of the ground from these elaborate tunnels that they had developed underground. Tunnels that had booby traps like punji stakes, where they could move men and materials unseen by the United States. And this meant the U.S. in many ways couldn't fight Vietnam with the military might of, say, World War II or even Korea. Tanks aren't going to really be any good here. Nuclear weapons, it's not really an option in Vietnam because you don't want to go that direction. So Americans are going to have to adjust their fighting style, and it's almost a David versus Goliath biblical kind of pairing here. These spunky, freedom-fighting North Vietnamese communists versus this massive, giant that has got all this might and ability. And a number of historians, in fact, have pointed out not only is it a sort of David versus Goliath sort of thing, it could be profitably compared to the American Revolution, where Americans versus the giant in the British. So you can see here the tunnels, small, there's some traps. Tourists today do get to venture through them in Vietnam. Americans, disappeared into them trying to figure out what was going on, but oh my gosh, that would be really scary to drop down into a hole in which you don't know what's happening or who's in there or what's going on. So the war quickly broke down, and in fact, the United States government lied to the public about the war's progress. They kept saying, body counts proved America's winning, and in fact, America was not winning. The war, though, was televised, and because Americans could watch the war and watch it unfold, they were trying to match up official statements to what they saw on TV, and they just didn't match. It created a credibility gap. Americans are not seeing success. They're not seeing the victories that have been promised to them. The public became increasingly divided between people who say that we should bomb even harder, fight even harder, and those who say, we should look at getting out. This is not working. The hawks wanting more of an aggressive, screeching response, and doves saying peace. Some of the issues that aroused some public attention were the use of chemicals in this warfare scenario. For example, napalm, which is jellied gasoline, sticks, and therefore it doesn't run off, it just burns as it sticks to things. And Agent Orange, which was a defoliant. Both of these were used to remove the jungle cover, but napalm fell on civilians, and of course you've got burning children, which we have pictures of, and Agent Orange, which is causing cancer, as we find out later. U.S. troops were feeling particularly ineffective. It's, the might of America in a fight against these peasants, and yet we're not capable of winning. So what's wrong with the U.S.? Our military arrogance is being brought down by these people, hiding underground and sneaking through the jungles. Vietnam tormented Johnson. So here's a president, who's worked for civil rights, worked to get rid of poverty, and now the ghosts of Vietnam are troubling his rest. They are visiting and haunting him in his sleep. The ghost of Vietnam past, present, and future. At one point, Johnson had very unceremoniously showed his gallbladder surgery scar to journalists, prompting one cartoonist to show the scar not as the actual scar on his abdomen, but a scar as representing Vietnam. So we have here the original photograph, and then the cartoonist take on how Vietnam has become a scar on Johnson's credibility and leadership as a president. So many cartoons on Vietnam. Vietnam's the tiger, which Americans are trying to hold to, LBJ here. But how do you let go of the tiger, but then also hold on to the tiger? Because, as soon as you let go, the tiger's going to turn around and maul you. This actually reminds me of Jefferson's comment about slavery. It's like holding a wolf by the ears. You can't hold on to him, but you also can't afford to let go. Americans called for escalation. Let's bomb the heck out of them and win this thing, beat them commies. And other people would put their heads in the sand and say, we need to get out. So this cartoonist, Bill Malden, captured these two hawk versus dove points of view to say that Vietnam seems to have no solution that makes sense. You can't fight even harder and win, and you can't hide your head in the sand and win either. This is a famous illustration of the effects of jungle warfare. Napalm had been launched against these kids' village, and this young girl has had her skin burned from napalm. There is footage of women carrying babies with skin peeling off of them from these attacks. And when Americans see those kinds of attacks, they wonder, what are we doing? Is burning children about communism? Really? Is this America's moral, destiny in terms of trying to fight the commies in the third world? Are we actually on firm footing in Vietnam? The deaths of civilians in Vietnam and children, as illustrated in this picture, caused many Americans to wonder, why are we there? What's really going on? The worst of these incidents happened at My Lai in 1968. My Lai was an attack on a small village with about 400 and 500 Vietnamese civilians being killed by the United States. And I have an account of My Lai from one of the people who was there. And this account is shocking and chilling about the United States in terms of its involvement in this conflict. The first killing was an old man outside a field, outside the village, who said some kind of greeting in Vietnamese and waved his arms at us. Someone said to kill him, and a big, heavy-set white fellow killed the man. Just after the man killed the Vietnamese, a woman came out of the village and someone knocked her down and shot her with his M16 rifle. I was 50 feet from him and saw this. There was no reason to shoot the girl. It was pure out-and-out murder. Then our squad started into the village. We made sure no one escaped from the village. 75 or 100 yards inside, we came to where the soldiers had collected 15 or more men, women, and children in a group. One of our leaders said, "Kill everybody, leave no one standing." Wood was there with an M60 machine gun, and on order, he fired into the people. Just after the shooting, Medina stopped a 17 or 18-year-old man with a water buffalo. Medina said for the boy to make a run for it. He tried to get him to run, and the boy wouldn't run, so Medina shot him with his rifle and killed him. We went through the village. Medlo shot a Vietnamese and asked me to help throw the man in the well. Also in the village, soldiers had rounded up a group of people. Medlo was guarding them. There were some other soldiers. Callie come up and said behind him and said he wanted them all killed. I was right there when he said it. Medlo and Widmer fired into this group with an M16 and killed them all. A woman came out of a hut with a baby in her arms, and she was crying. She was crying because her little boy had been in front of the hut, between the well and the hut, and someone had killed the boy by shooting it. She came out of the hut with her baby. Widmer shot her with an M16. She fell. When she fell, she dropped the baby. Then Widmer opened up on the baby and killed the baby too. Testimony like this about the My Lai massacre, images on the news, made Americans wonder, why are we in Vietnam? Many of the Americans wondering about America's involvement in Vietnam were young folks, since they're being drafted to go fight in Vietnam. And these new left youth opposed the establishment, the people in charge, the squares, and questioned, what was America really doing? Many of them rejected the liberalism of their parents. They'd grown up in fairly liberal circumstances, but now saw their parents as hypocrites, as false, as fake. They were often frustrated by social change being slow, so they wanted a better, safer, more democratic, more free, more liberal America, but it just wasn't happening quickly. Many of these youth were organized on college campuses where they worked together as students to challenge the leadership of the colleges as well as the United States. Collectively, they burned draft cards to say, we're not going to the war, we're not getting drafted. They held campus protests based on free speech, such as that held at Berkeley, led by Mario Savio in 1966, where they wanted the campus to be more open to different points of view and to not shut down speeches against the war or speeches that were critical of American policies. They were influenced by the civil rights movement because the people of SNCC as well as Martin Luther King Jr. criticized Vietnam as well. SNCC and MLK criticized the war because it more disproportionately affected African Americans. African Americans were only about 10 to 11% of the US population, but they made up 20% of all the casualties in Vietnam. So the weight of Vietnam fell heavy on young black men who were dying in great numbers in a war that nobody understood why we were even there. Here are the leaders for free speech. Notice they're all well dressed. So these are not young people who are the hippie children that we're going to come to know in a minute. These are well-dressed young liberals, the products of suburbia, right? They grew up and came of age as members of the baby boom, and they just don't see their parents as being honest liberals. They see mom and dad as kind of stuck in a bygone age where freedom is not really being pushed for everybody. Music culture during the time also pointed to the fact that Americans didn't understand what was going on in Vietnam. This is one of my favorite songs from this time period, Country Joe and the Fish. I feel like I'm fixing to die, and this actually was on an AP exam one year. Yeah, come on, all you big strong men. Uncle Sam needs your help again. He's got himself in a terrible jam way down yonder in Vietnam. So put down your books and pick up a gun. We're going to have a whole lot of fun. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam. And it's 5, 6, 7. Open up the pearly gates. Well, there ain't no time to wonder why. Whoopee, we're all gonna die. Notice, of course, the lack of understanding in Vietnam. Also, the sort of sense of fatalism. We don't know why we're there, but we all know we're going to get killed. The war generation, anti-war generation of the youth of this time period, do increasingly turn to nature. And so we're going to see the flower power movement emerge in response to the war. My favorite, of course, is this 1967 protest outside the Pentagon, where these anti-war protesters are inserting flowers into the barrels of the guns. So what better an image of peace and love and harmony than, you know, challenging the machinery of war, the emblems of war, with something from nature. That inspired people to rally around the phrase, what if they gave a war and nobody came? Which was a Carl Sandburg poem that got popularized in an article in 1966. Let's leave the machinery of war to rot, to rust in the fields. (1968) became the year of Vietnam shocks. First of all, America was blindsided by the Tet Offensive in January of 1968. We've been telling Americans year after year, oh yeah, we're winning, the Vietnamese can't possibly beat us, this is going to work. And then those commies staged a massive counterattack. And Americans are like looking at the evidence going, we're winning, and yet they established this massive attack. It becomes a severe psychological defeat for Americans that we can't seem to now reconcile official government pronouncements with what we're seeing in the war. Uncle Sam is really starting to look like a liar. It's going to lead to major declines in public support for Johnson. Vietnam is wrecking Johnson's public image. No longer the king of civil rights, the master of the Senate. He is now seen as this great failure in Vietnam. The My Lai massacre, as I've read already, the description of what went on there, is going to highlight the depravity of U.S. soldiers. They're murdering children. How is this even remotely fulfilling the goal of anti-communism? So the war is starting to look unwinnable, unsuccessful, and indefensible. As millions of men are taking to battle, 47,000 of them will die by the end of the war. 10,000 we're not sure what happened to. POWs disappear in the jungles. 600,000 Americans will evade the draft and burn their draft cards. This war will cost $173 billion, as we have dropped 822,000 tons of bombs on North Vietnam. By 1968, a majority of Americans will say this is a mistake, as it leaves 2 million Vietnamese people dead, and Americans saying, I don't give a damn for Uncle Sam. I ain't going to Vietnam. Protests such as Ohio State, you can see here, paint LBJ as a war criminal. A popular chant is, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? How many young men did you send off to die in the jungles of Vietnam? Originally, this bumper sticker satirized the war to say, join the army, travel to exotic, distant lands, meet exciting, unusual people, and kill them. African Americans made up a very large proportion of Vietnam deaths. So about 10%, 11% of the US population, 20% of all casualties. And African Americans are realizing their bodies are just propping up white supremacy in a Southeast Asian country. Uncle Sam wants you, and notice the use of the N-word in this. You know, you don't have to die in the American cities in the riots going on here in the United States or from the hands of the Ku Klux Klan. You can go to Vietnam and maybe even get a medal, dying for freedom there that you don't have here. The students against Vietnam organized into the Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS. SDS issued a proclamation that rejected the moderate liberalism of LBJ and their parents. You know, the liberalism of mom and dad is a joke. It's a sham. This statement is known as the Port Huron Statement, which they called for real, open, true democracy in the United States for all citizens. That is, we are not just going to have, you know, fake, sham liberal democracy. We're going to have a real, functioning democratic system in the United States where travesties like Vietnam will not happen. As many of these young folks are resisting the values of their parents, there's an emerging counterculture. And so These are kids who are saying, I don't want to be in Vietnam. I want civil rights. I want more freedom. I want to get out of the restrictive rules of mom and dad's house. And so there's an entire movement of them that become the hippies that we know. Let's ride around and peace and flower power. Let's grow out our hair and wear funky clothes. Let's experiment with communal living, almost like a return to the utopias of the 1830s. Let's experiment with drugs. Let's have open sexuality where we're just engaged in free love, man. It's free. Doesn't that blow your mind, man? Yeah, you just want to get hip with the young people, and anybody over 30, you can't trust them. They're square, man. You want to tune in, turn on, and drop out. Yeah. The high point of this love and communal life and rejection of the values of the parents comes at Woodstock. Summer of love, 3 days of all kinds of love and celebration of being human and free. In 1969, of course, it was a big mess. Lots of not so nice things happened. But for many people, it encapsulated sort of the goals of this counterculture, which then